In a galaxy where survival defines supremacy, no species held a greater reputation for brutality and resilience than the Gorvath. Born of fire and storms, the Gorvath evolved on a world few dared to even study: Korvac, a Class 15 death world, riddled with active volcanoes, acid storms, jagged landscapes, and nightmarish predators. Every breath taken there was earned. Every step forward required blood. They were forged in catastrophe, and from that crucible they emerged proud, savage, and unchallenged. Among the Galactic Council's many classifications, agricultural worlds, trade hubs, research colonies 1. Ranking stirred fear into the heart of even the most hardened species. Death World Class, a scale measuring lethality. It defined how likely a planet was to kill any life attempting to exist on it. Korvac had sat at the top for centuries. It's uncontested. So when the Council announced a new initiative, the Death World Project, its goal was to reassess the lethality of the known galaxy's deadliest planets and species. It was part research, part spectacle, and entirely political. The Gorvath welcomed it. They saw it as a ceremony, a reaffirmation of their status. Let the lesser worlds submit data. Let the other species witness their dominance. During the first council session, where representatives presented data from their respective homeworlds, the Gorvath delivered a theatrical presentation, live footage of molten rivers, predators larger than tanks, ash-choked skies, and death counts from failed colonization attempts. Counselors watched in horror. Some even turned away. The Gorvath delegate, High Marshal Kurvarn, bared his teeth in satisfaction. Then came the unexpected entry. Earth. It was submitted late, by a curious council assistant from the Zelari race, who stumbled upon some archived Terran data, unranked. Poorly categorized. No comprehensive scans. At first the council almost ignored it entirely, but when Earth's observational drones returned fragments of visual data, the mood in the chamber shifted. First came footage of a group of humans swimming in icy waters for recreation, then images of firewalkers, mountain climbers, braving the death zone without oxygen, a man who survived being struck by lightning 7 times. More clips followed, humans boxing for sport, racing motorcycles on cliffs, and handling deadly animals with casual smiles. One showed a child poking a sleeping lion in the ribs. The lion growled. The child laughed. Another captured a firefighter saving a family from a collapsing, burning building, only to return seconds later to save the family dog. The room fell silent. The Zelari assistant timidly offered a verbal summary. Their apex predator is themselves. They war. They train to endure artificial starvation and pain. They consume toxic liquids for enjoyment. Some attempt to summit their planet's highest peaks with no supplemental oxygen. They domesticated wolves. And they voluntarily jump from their own aircraft with nothing but cloth strapped to their backs. The final video displayed a shirtless human man wrestling a crocodile in front of cheering spectators. High Marshal, Kurvarn snarled. Lies. Fabrications. Surely these are isolated anomalies. The council president, a calm, long-lived species named Voller, looked unsettled. The data is real. These humans. Our planet may rival, perhaps even exceed, Korvac in total environmental and behavioral risk. A rumble swept through the council chamber. The very idea of Korvac being challenged felt sacrilegious. The Gorvath howled in outrage. They are hairless prey, masquerading as predators. Kurvarn shouted, claws digging into the council podium. But the evidence said otherwise. For the first time in centuries, the Death World crown was in question. The humans, who had been watching from their new observer station on Luna Base, didn't respond immediately. When asked for comment, their ambassador simply smiled. Crown, he asked. We didn't know we'd lost it. And with that, the spark was lit. The Gorvath demanded a formal challenge, a ritual of survival, a contest to settle once and for all who truly deserved to wear the Death World crown. It would be combat, endurance and intellect all in one brutal gauntlet. The council hesitated, but ultimately agreed, and far away on Earth, a lone human woman zipped up her survival pack and stepped onto a transport ship with quiet confidence. Her name was Alara Quinn, and she was about to remind the galaxy why Earth wasn't just dangerous, it was home to the most terrifying species ever born. The Death World Crown Challenge was no longer just symbolic. It had become the most watched event in galactic history, streamed across thousands of systems. Taught in military academies in real time, and debated by every species that ever knew. Fear. For the first time in centuries, the Gorvath faced the unthinkable. A challenger worthy of Korvac's legend. The Council designed the arena carefully. It would be a brutal hybrid of Korvac's volcanic terrain and Earth's savage. Biomes an ever-shifting nightmare of acid rains, blizzards, lava flows, predatory life forms, and poisoned air pockets. Nothing was fair. Nothing was safe. That was the point. Each species would send a single representative. The Gorvath chose Kraskthula, towering behemoth of muscle, tusks, and legacy. He was not just a survivor of Korvac's worst eruptions. He was a warrior poet who once fought a canyon serpent barehanded, then used its fangs to carve his victory poem into obsidian. The Gorvath called him Firewalker, Stormborn, and Crown Keeper. The humans, by contrast, offered no grand titles or boasts. They simply sent Staff Sergeant Alara Quinn, survival instructor from Earth's remote Arctic cores. Her service record was clean, quiet, and brutal, trapped in a Siberian whiteout for 3 weeks. She emerged with one frostbitten hand and a domesticated wolf. She refused evacuation. Still had supplies, she'd said now. She stood in the drop chamber of the simulated arena, clad in minimal armor, scanning the topography projected before her. Ash storms, volcanic ridges, bioacid swamps, avalanche zones, carnivorous, fog beasts. She studied the map, not with fear, but with curiosity. In a chamber on the opposite side, Kraskell sharpened his claws against his bone-wrought axe. "Human," he growled, watching her on the pre-drop monitor. Soft, small, she will scream. The countdown ended. 2 platforms dropped. The trial had begun. Alara hit the ground rolling, rising with practiced calm. She checked her breathing. Mask snapped her utility knife to her wrist and immediately began observing the local terrain. Volcanic heat rose from beneath, but the air chilled rapidly. An unnatural temperature split meant to test physiological adaptability. She smiled. Cold feet, hot head, like boot camp in June. She moved quickly, seeking shelter. It's not to hide, but to learn. Krasksoul did not seek shelter. He roared. The trees of his zone obsidian, limbed and thorn-rooted, cracked beneath. His charging steps, he smashed his first enemy, a fangback leaper native to Earth's jungle simulations. Its venomous barbs glanced off his armored hide. He crushed its skull in one blow, the early commentators declared. Him dominant. But they hadn't seen what Alara was doing. Within hours, she had built 3 traps. 1 pitfall with bone spikes from a scavenged corpse. 1 triggered snare tied with twisted plant fiber and anchored by a tree root, and 1 more a deadfall log. Balanced precariously over a narrow ravine she predicted Krasksoul would cross. She'd also begun studying the local predators. Unlike Krasksoul, Alara didn't fight everything, she observed. She learned the feeding patterns of the Hexide stalkers. Noticed their fear of certain red-leafed flora and began marking her camp perimeter with crushed leaves. The creatures avoided her for the rest of the night. The Gorvath, meanwhile, continued his rampage burning, cleaving, tearing. But his breathing began to rasp. The temperature shift grew worse. His thick body armor, suited for volcanic terrain, now steamed with sweat in the frigid wind. He refused to adapt. Worked. He pushed forward, unaware that the arena was turning against him. The second day brought storm's acid rain mixed with snow. Kraskell roared in fury, clutching his steaming shoulders, the rain burning into his hide. Alara? She was dry. She'd found high ground, built a lean-to with waterproof bark, and treated her skin with a protective salve she'd mixed from swamp plant resin and crushed insect husks. Toxic, yes, but only mildly. Then humans were masters of metabolizing. Mild poisons. By midday, Kraskell stumbled into one of her traps. The spike pit didn't kill him. It wasn't meant to. It gouged his leg, slowed him down, forced him to leave a bloody trail. Ilara stalked from the shadows, unseen. Unheard, she didn't strike. She studied. By the end of the third day, the arena had claimed 80% of the native fauna. Kraskell was limping, growling at shadows. His arrogance was gone, replaced by frustration. In a quiet cave, Ilara cooked a small meal over a smokeless fire. She looked into the camera, knowing billions were watching. "Strength burns fast," she said softly, "but adaptability burns forever." The galaxy, for the first time, realized something chilling. This wasn't a fight between monsters. It was a chess game between predators. And Ilara Quinn wasn't just playing, she was winning. Kraskell was bleeding. He limped across the jagged volcanic spires of the arena, dragging his weight through ash and snow, his breath ragged. Muscles burned from days of unrelenting aggression. His wounds, some from the arena's beasts. Others from his own arrogance, bled openly, seared only by his pride. He had dominated every threat thrown his way, crushed a cave beast's skull with his bare hands, killed a frost lizard mid-charge, torn out the tongue of a venom-spitting vulture with nothing but brute strength. But this wasn't a test of domination. It was a test of endurance, of strategy. And he was losing because every time he advanced, he found something that she had already touched, a snare he barely avoided. A crude warning sign carved into a tree bark. Fog beast nest this way. Turn back. Camp he'd stumbled into clean. Efficient, with dried food sealed against the elements. Built not with panicked haste, but deliberate calm. Kraskell stared at the remains of Ilara's fire, noting how it had burned smokeless and slow. The wood had been soaked in something she'd made from the flora. Her scent lingered, but not freshly. She was days ahead. That realization cut deeper than any wound. Meanwhile, Ilara Quinn crouched on a ledge overlooking the sulphurous valley. Her clothes were scorched, torn at the knees, but her posture was relaxed. She sipped water through a homemade filter crafted from moss and volcanic stone. Her eyes scanned the horizon, but not with urgency, with quiet calculation. She was never going to fight Kraskell directly. Why would she? Let the terrain do it for her. Let the weather wear him down. Let his instincts betray him while hers, honed through centuries of human survival training, evolved. On Earth, humans didn't just overcome nature. They understood it. They adapted. They bent it to their will. That's what Ilara was doing. Her every move was designed not to conquer the arena, but to restructure it. Her traps weren't flashy. They didn't roar or detonate. They inconvenienced, slowed, confused. They drained Kraskell 1 inch at a time. The great warrior had arrived expecting a duel. What he got was a war of attrition. The fourth night came with a blinding ash storm. The cold bit harder than usual. Ilara hunkered down in a cave she had sealed with clay and smoke-treated bark. She'd insulated her clothing with moss and predator hide. Her fire crackled gently, invisible from outside. She checked her supplies. She had meat, clean water, spare bark, acid-resistant gloves. She also had something more important: time. Meanwhile, Kraskell huddled beneath a fractured boulder, shivering uncontrollably. The heat that once served him on Korvac now turned into a curse as the climate froze. His bulk, once his strength, made every movement harder. The Gorvath were used to fire but had never trained in the cold. No death world prepared its children for every condition except Earth. The next morning, Kraskell pressed forward, rage fueling his steps. He growled into the fog, trying to flush her out. "Ilara Quinn," he roared, "come face me. No more tricks." She heard it from far above, and she smiled. She'd waited for this moment. Kraskell was moving toward her last trap, a false trail, marked with her scent, leading to a loose rock ledge over a sulphurous ravine. She had spent 3 days loosening the ridge's stability. When Kraskell stepped on it, the ground gave way. He roared as the stones collapsed beneath him, tumbling. Down the slope, bouncing hard against the rock face before slamming into the base of the cliff. He lay there, stunned. But broken, Ilara approached slowly. She didn't carry a weapon. She didn't need to. Kraskell looked up at her, blinking blood from one eye. His body trembled. Not just from pain, but from something unfamiliar. Respect. You. Do not fight fair, he rasped. No, Ilara replied. I fight to win. She tossed down a flare beside him, standard Terran emergency signal for pickup. She'd triggered the arena's end protocol. "You still breathing?" she asked casually. He gave a weak nod. "Good, the council can extract you now." She turned and walked away, not looking back. At the extraction point, council drones descended upon both competitors. Kraskell was airlifted out on a stretcher, bloodied and silent. Ilara stood tall, exhausted but grinning as she emerged from the simulation zone. Alien commentators exploded with analysis. She more dangerous than Kraskell? No, she was smarter, more efficient. And most frighteningly of all, calm. In war, as in survival. Fury burned out, but discipline endured. Billions watched the replay across the galaxy. Jaws slack, spines chilled. She didn't just win the trial, she had outclassed the legend. And with that, the Death World crowned the symbol of ultimate resilience. Shifted, not with thunder, but with strategy. Earth wasn't just in the conversation anymore. They were at the top. The arena had gone quiet. Kraskell, once the unshakable symbol of Gorvath's strength, was gone. Carried out on a stretcher, half-conscious. His armor cracked and body torn, not by overwhelming force, but by a methodical dismantling. And Ilara? Quinn, the human survivor, the quiet warrior with cold eyes and steady breath, had walked out alone. The galaxy didn't cheer, it stared. In every spaceport bar, every military hall, every war room, and academy. Species that had feared the Gorvath. For centuries rewound the footage and asked the same question. How did she do it? It wasn't raw strength. Kraskell outmatched her there. It wasn't firepower. She carried barely more than a knife. It was intelligence, restraint, tactical cruelty wrapped in human. Efficiency, she had turned survival into an artand. The arena into a classroom. On the capital world of Varellus Prime, the Galactic Council convened in an emergency session. Attendance was full. No member dared miss this vote. The chamber, a spiraling glass construct suspended above the city's skyline, shimmered with tension. At the center stood the council president Voller, flanked by members of every major species in the known galaxy, even the elusive Skarn shadows. Center representative, the topic was clear: re-evaluation of Death World, classification rankings. Counselor Kesh of the Heron Clade addressed the floor first. The footage is indisputable. Kraskell is not weak. He is not lesser. He is the finest warrior the Gorvath have produced in a generation. And yet he was outmaneuvered by the human Ilara Quinn, not through violence, but through mastery. Of hostile terrain, predictive strategy, and psychological warfare. Murmurs rippled through the delegates. Counselor Ron of the Grithen Hive spoke next. Earth was labeled unranked because our probes failed. Perhaps they didn't fail. Perhaps they simply didn't survive. A grim silence fell over the chamber. Even the Gorvath, seated in shadow, said nothing. Voller spoke. A proposal has been placed before this body, that Earth, homeworld of humanity, be formally designated Class 17 Death World above Korvac. A long pause. Then votes began to stream in. Approved, 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 abstain, approved, 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 when the vote ended. The result was clear. Earth now stood at the top, and with it came the symbolic and deeply respected title of Death World. Crown bearers High Marshal Kurvarn, the Gorvath delegate, stood slowly. His face was unreadable. He stepped forward, claws at his sides, tail low. For centuries we wore the crown with honor, he growled. We welcomed challengers. Conquered those who dared. We never lied to ourselves about what survival means. He turned to face Ilara, who stood in her simple Terran survival uniform. Her face calm beneath the council's many eyes. You beat us, he said simply. Not with brutality, not with rage, but with precision. With respect for danger and power over ego. He dropped to one knee. The Gorvath yielded the crown. Gasps echoed across the chamber. Alara didn't bow. She didn't smirk. She stepped forward and extended her hand. He clasped it. Blood-stained claws against calloused fingers. "I didn't take it from you," she said softly. "We just earned it back." The change in galactic perception was immediate. Earth's entry in the Council archives was updated. Species, human homeworld, Earth designation. Class 17 Death World Cultural Summary. Adaptive, aggressively curious, high tolerance to stress, high social bonding, exceptional pain endurance, extreme weather and fauna resistance. It's not advised to provoke. But it wasn't just the database that changed. It was the conversation all across the galaxy. Warriors, leaders, and scholars began discussing Earth not as a curiosity, but as a standard. The Jaren, known for their elite survivalists, began translating human field manuals into their own language. The Vakari war monks asked to study under Alara's survival discipline, and the merchant guilds began tripling hazard pay for any mission involving Terran environments. Alara returned to Earth quietly. No parades. No press. But when she entered the Arctic base where she'd once trained, she found her old students standing. In salute on the wall was a new plaque. The cold forged her. The fire couldn't break her. The galaxy will never forget her. Death World crowned champions. Somewhere deep in the void, on Korvac Kraskthal stood again. He was healed physically. At least he watched a replay of the final arena collapse over and over again. Not with resentment, but with fascination. "They don't fight to prove strength," he said aloud to no one. "They fight to win without dying. There's no glory in death for them, only in survival." He turned to his trainees. "We trained to conquer Korvac. Now we train to understand Earth." And in the heart of the Terran Republic, a quiet message was drafted. Earth's first statement since claiming the Death World crown. It contained only 3 words. After Earth was crowned the deadliest world in the galaxy, one might have expected humanity to revel in its reputation, to build weapons of terror, posture on the council floor, or threaten those who once laughed at their obscurity. But humans didn't gloat. They built a school. It was called the Terran Institute for Extreme Adaptation, TIE. And it orbited Europa Prime, a central trade world where alien species from every quadrant crossed paths. The institute was housed in a massive, rotating ring station, built by human engineers in collaboration with reluctant but intrigued alien scientists. Its purpose was simple, its message clearer. You want to survive like us? Learn how we do. And they came. The first class of cadets included species with chitin, fur, feathers, and even stone-like exoskin. Many had never trained together. Most had never taken humans seriously until now. Each had seen what Alara Quinn did to Krasklo. Each had reviewed the arena tapes. Each had read the reclassified dossiers on Earth, and they wanted to understand. At the center of it all stood Alara Quinn, now director of TIE. She wore no medals. She had no formal rank beyond her title. But every cadet watched her as if survival itself depended on her next breath. In her first lecture, she walked into a cavernous training hall, walls scorched from flamethrower exercises, climbing surfaces, still cooling from frost drills, and faced the assembled cadets. "You've been told Earth is a death world," she began. "It is. But don't get that confused with it being a place of death. No, a Sci-Fi. I'm sing with I'm so I some for I saw Fuffen sign I'm said I saw theft sin I for She paused, letting that settle. Deathworlders don't just survive. They build, they protect, they teach. And the deadliest thing on Earth isn't the bears, the lightning, the diseases, or the volcanoes. She pointed to her own temple. It's this. Weeks turned into months. Cadets were thrown into brutal survival simulations designed after Earth's most unforgiving terrains. Jungle Drop, where you had to locate water in 48 hours without being eaten. Zero Gear March, a tundra survival march with no tools or weapons. Urban hellscape based on post-collapse cities where threats came from both terrain and other beings, instructors, all human, offered minimal assistance. Instead, they pushed cadets to think, improvise, adapt. Many broke. Some begged to quit. Others, changed by the process, found something terrifying and exhilarating within themselves. Resilience, a Grithan cadet. Once a coward under fire, learned to rig thermal traps using scrap metal and body heat. A Vakari monk redefined her. Meditation discipline to stay calm while stalked by a synthetic Earthwolf prototype. Even a Gorvath trainee sent by Krasksil himself volunteered to lead the swamp fire run, and returned half-burned but triumphant. What humanity had known for thousands of years was now being absorbed by the rest of the SE galaxy's survival. Isn't about muscle, it's about mindset. Meanwhile, Earth's influence spread. Terran field manuals were translated into over 300 alien dialects. Human gear, basic boots, rope, flint, and knives became highly sought after. Entire planetary militaries began rethinking training methods. Less combat, more adaptability. One galactic military strategist even noted, "We used to measure strength by how many enemies one could kill. Now, we measure it by how long one can live when everything wants them dead." Human culture was analyzed in detail. Why did they run toward danger? Why did their children play games simulating war, survival, and loss? Why did they laugh while standing on the edge of death? And why, despite countless wars and disasters, did they never stop moving forward? The answers weren't always pleasant, but they were always true. One day, during a rare open forum at Tia, a cadet from the pacifist Laquari species stood and asked Alara a direct question. "Do you think humans deserve the Deathworld crown?" The room went silent. Ilara leaned forward on the podium. "No," she said. "Not because we're unworthy, but because we don't need it." Confusion spread across the crowd. She continued. "That title means something to you. Fear, power, dominance. But to us, Earth never gave us a choice. We learned to survive because we had to. We learned to teach because we wanted to." She turned, gesturing toward the training chambers. "You're here because you want to wear that crown. That's fine. But just remember, humans wore it long before there was a crown, before there was a council, before there were even stars in our sky." The session ended, but the message didn't, because Earth didn't just teach survival. It taught how to turn survival into wisdom, and across the galaxy. As warlords hesitated, soldiers rewrote doctrine, and scientists redesigned disaster protocols. One truth quietly took hold. The species that mastered death now taught life, and that was far more dangerous.